Lack of physical energy. Motivation begins in the body. When the body's systems lose balance, the mind follows. Lack of physical energy is one of the most common yet misunderstood reasons people lose motivation. Sleep deprivation, poor diet, and dehydration silently drain dopamine and serotonin, the brain's natural motivators. Without these, even basic tasks feel heavier. The nervous system shifts into energy-saving mode, prioritizing survival over ambition. What seems like laziness is often biology in defense. The body isn't rejecting work, it's asking for recovery. In such moments, discipline isn't the cure, rest is. Because until the body is refueled, the mind cannot sustain drive. Mental burnout. Burnout is not the loss of desire, it's the collapse of the brain's reward response. When constant pressure, deadlines, and comparison flood the system with cortisol, the mind stops associating effort with pleasure. Work becomes mechanical, progress loses feeling. This is psychological overload, disguised as apathy. The brain shuts motivation down to protect itself from stress. It's not that passion disappears, it gets buried beneath exhaustion. True recovery starts when rest stops being mistaken for failure, because sometimes, doing nothing is the only way to feel something again. Lack of clear purpose, motivation begins to fade the moment purpose disappears. When the why behind actions weakens, every task starts to feel mechanical, a routine carried out without emotional meaning. Purpose is what turns effort into identity. It tells the brain why energy should be spent. Without that connection, the mind quietly disengages. Goals are still pursued, but they lose depth. Work becomes repetition instead of growth. Psychologically, this detachment reflects a breakdown in intrinsic motivation, the drive that comes from within. The reward is no longer internal satisfaction, but external completion. When direction vanishes, progress feels hollow, and effort turns into fatigue. This emptiness is not always visible, but it's deeply felt, a silent erosion of meaning that slowly drains persistence. Overwhelming goals. Motivation collapses, not from the size of the goal, but from the distance between the present and the ideal. When objectives are too ambitious or abstract, the brain's dopamine system stops rewarding effort. It thrives on incremental progress, small signs of movement that validate the path forward. Overwhelming goals, however, create a psychological gap that feels impossible to close. The result is paralysis, not because the desire is gone, but because the reward feels unreachable. Neuroscientifically, this is the mind conserving energy against perceived failure. What looks like procrastination is often emotional protection. Breaking down goals restores the feedback loop that fuels persistence. Progress, not perfection, sustains motivation, and when progress disappears, resistance takes its place. Fear of failure. Fear of failure is one of the brain's oldest and most protective mechanisms. Evolution wired humans to avoid danger, and over time, the mind began to treat mistakes as emotional threats. When self-worth becomes tied to performance, the brain interprets every risk as potential humiliation. This fear disguises itself as hesitation, perfectionism, or procrastination, each a subtle attempt to avoid pain. Neuroscience shows that fear activates the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, which floods the body with stress hormones. The result is paralysis, energy redirected from progress towards self-protection. What's lost isn't ability, but opportunity. Failure never destroys motivation. Fear of it does. Over time, the mind learns safety at the cost of growth, mistaking inaction for control, comparison, and external validation. Comparison is a modern form of psychological hunger. When success becomes a scoreboard, motivation stops being self-directed and becomes conditional. Each online highlight reel redefines what enough looks like, shifting focus from progress to approval. The brain, constantly exposed to others' achievements, learns to crave validation like a reward. Dopamine, the same chemical that drives ambition, begins responding not to purpose, but to recognition. This rewires the motivational system toward external feedback loops. The result is emotional fatigue, the quiet sense that no effort is ever sufficient. Over time, self-worth becomes dependent on response rather than reflection. Authentic ambition dissolves into comparison fatigue, leaving behind exhaustion disguised as effort. When attention turns outward, the mind forgets how to move inward, and motivation loses its meaning. Constant distractions. Distraction is the silent destroyer of motivation. Modern environments are engineered to capture attention, not protect it. Each notification, message, or advertisement resets the brain's focus, forcing it to rebuild momentum from zero. Cognitive researchers call this the switching cost, the mental toll paid every time attention is broken. These tiny interruptions accumulate, fragmenting deep thought and draining mental energy. Motivation doesn't vanish because desire weakens, it fades because focus is repeatedly fractured. The brain's reward system thrives on sustained effort, but fragmented attention denies it continuity. In an environment louder than one's goals, the mind never reaches flow, that state where work feels natural and fulfilling. The result isn't failure of discipline, it's erosion by noise. Lack of support or community. Motivation rarely survives in isolation. Humans are wired for social reinforcement, to learn, persist, and grow through shared effort. When surrounded by people who model consistency and belief, the brain mirrors their energy. Psychologists call this social contagion, the subconscious transfer of motivation through observation and interaction. But when support disappears, accountability weakens. Each setback feels heavier, each success less meaningful. The absence of shared encouragement dulls progress. Even digital communities can reignite purpose because they remind the mind it isn't struggling alone. Isolation slowly replaces ambition with apathy. Connection, then, isn't optional, it's psychological fuel. Without it, the will to persist quietly fades, not from lack of effort, but from feeling unseen. Conflict with core values. Motivation breaks down when goals collide with one's core values. The conscious mind pushes forward, but the subconscious resists, creating a silent psychological conflict. This friction drains energy from within, not because the goal is impossible, but because it feels misaligned. Working in a role that contradicts one's beliefs, or chasing success that feels inauthentic, forces the brain into emotional dissonance. Neuroscience shows that this kind of value conflict triggers the same stress circuits as physical pain. The mind interprets it as self-betrayal effort without integrity. Motivation doesn't disappear, it becomes trapped behind moral resistance. True drive sustains only when goals align with identity. When actions reflect what a person genuinely believes in, effort no longer requires force, it flows. Alignment, not intensity, keeps ambition alive. Loss of meaning or direction. The deepest form of demotivation emerges when meaning itself dissolves. Progress without purpose turns achievement into emptiness. Psychologists describe this as existential burnout, when the question shifts from "can I do this?" to "why should I?" In this state, effort feels disconnected from fulfillment. The brain, deprived of emotional significance, stops releasing dopamine for progress. This loss of coherence makes even success feel hollow. No reward system can compensate for the absence of meaning, because meaning is the final source of psychological energy. Reigniting motivation requires rediscovering significance, not merely setting new goals. When life regains its sense of why, direction naturally follows. Meaning fuels all other forms of motivation, and when it returns, everything else begins to move again. Motivation doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes through fatigue, confusion, fear, distraction, and disconnection. Each reason is a symptom, not a flaw. Behind every drop in drive is a signal from the mind, asking for balance, clarity, or truth. Understanding these reasons isn't about forcing discipline, it's about removing friction. Because when nothing blocks it, the human mind is naturally driven to grow.